Lille are on the verge of their first Liga title since 2010-11. We're going to have a look at Christophe Galtier's tactics for Lille now and explain how he's taken this side to within touching distance of a championship that everyone always expects PSG to win. We're going to start by looking at the defence here, and this is really important because Lille have only conceded 22 goals this season. That's the fewest in Liga. That compensates for some of the problems that they've had in attack, where they've scored only the fourth most goals. They've also wildly exceeded their expected goals tally, but we'll talk about that a little bit later when we come to look at the attack. The defence is anchored by a classic right foot, left foot combination. So Jose Font, who people will remember from his time at Southampton, he was signed on a free transfer from China a few seasons back. And on the left, Sven Botman, who's a very young, promising defender who will probably move somewhere in the summer. He was picked up from Ajax's under-21s for about 7 million. These guys are the crucial anchors, along with the goalkeeper, Mike Maignan, who is a very proactive goalkeeper. He's statistically the second best in Liga at the moment in terms of post-shot expected goals, which is basically, it means that he's saved about 5 to 6 goals more than you'd expect him to. He's also pretty dominant, likes coming out for crosses, and that's very important for Lille's defensive structure. Generally speaking, they will play in quite a compact 4-4-2 block. Sometimes this will look a little bit more like a 4-2-2-2, so your wide players here, we've got Bamba and Akone, but sometimes they mix them around so that different people play out wide. They will tuck in slightly. Effectively, what Lille are trying to do here is they're trying to make sure that this central space here is covered, that it's really, really difficult to push through, that there's minimal spacing between the lines, that this guy, say here, the opposition centre forward, he's got no room to manoeuvre, he can't really go anywhere. And that plays into Lille's hands because what they want is for the opposition to be trying to get the ball forwards into the wide areas. The reason for that is because Font and Botman are so good in the air, and because Maignan is a very dominant goalkeeper, as we've said, comes out for crosses and so on. Crosses into this sort of area aren't really a problem for Lille. One of the defenders will attack it, knock it away, and the midfield will gather up. They want to try and avoid, where possible, play coming through the centre, and that's partly because when they want to then attack, they're looking to attack largely through the wide areas. So that causes Lille to kind of expand outwards, and it means that this central area can become a little unprotected if they don't fold inside. So surrender the wide areas, get the opposition playing out here, cross into the box, not a massive issue. There's also something interesting that they do with their pressing. Now, Lille are not a particularly aggressive pressing side, particularly in the defensive third and the midfield third. That all changes once they get to the opposition's defensive third, their own attacking third. So if we give the ball to this centre-back here, obviously he's got a couple of passing options. He could pass here, he could pass back to here, he could pass here. Right, so that's what he can currently do. Get rid of those. What will happen is that the ball-sided attacker for Lille, in this instance it's Jonathan David, who's a young Canadian player signed from Belgium, very fast. He's going to push up here and he's going to put pressure on this centre-back. Burak Yilmaz, who's the other striker, who's relatively quick, albeit slightly older, he's not going to push up as well, nor is he going to go to this centre-back. He's actually going to drop into this space here. What that does is it tries to force the opposition centre-back to play out wide. No. Let's select the arrow. To play out wide, like that. This again then allows Lille to start pressing across up here. If that ball's played there, then he can nip in and win it back. He can nip in and win it back. Lille aren't bothered about the ball being out here. What they don't want is for an easy progression through the thirds. What's also quite interesting about the way that Lille press, if we move some of these other players up here so we can kind of create a slightly higher defensive line, is that they'll get a lot of players grouped around. So if the ball is out here, let's say, for example, that they're a little bit sloppy here and they manage to get the ball here. So we'll just put that pass on the screen to make it a little easier. All of a sudden, they will counter press really, really effectively. What you'll see then is a midfielder kind of moving into this space here to sort of patrol that area. This wide player will start to look to try and make a blindside run. And because they're able to surround the ball with a lot of players here, it's quite likely that they'll win it back and then they'll be able to counter at speed. All of a sudden, you've got Lille players making runs all over the place, and they're able to transition very quickly and effectively from defence into attack. So this is quite straightforward. To remind everyone, it's a nice, low, compact, low block and mid block in a kind of 4-4-2, 4-2-2-2 shape. Pressing really only starts in the final third of the pitch, but here they press very aggressively. They like to counter press a lot. They like to surround the opposition with players and then quickly explode out in a kind of counter-attacking transition. They'll mark these passing lanes. Everything is geared towards forcing the ball into these wide areas because Lille are very confident that at the back they can deal with anything of that nature. Now we're going to have a quick look at how Lille build up in possession, largely from the back, but also we'll look at some of their attacking movements, some of the things that have helped them create goals this season. In terms of their build-up play, they have two fairly repetitive patterns. The first sees the fullbacks here pushing up nice and high and wide. See the wide attackers tucking into the half spaces a little bit. Remember, the half spaces are these kind of portions of the pitch here outside the central one. The centre-backs will split nice and wide, and they're both good passing centre-backs. I mean, they're not necessarily like natural ball-playing types, but they're not incompetent. And one of the central midfielders will drop back to make a 3, so you get this kind of nice passing note, like that. There we go. So you've got passing options here between these guys. This other central midfielder here, Boubakary Soumaré often, but it might be Renato Sanchez as well, sometimes Checker. He's going to try and, I guess, escape a cover shadow maybe, but he's sort of moving around. Ideally, he will drag the opposition slightly out of position, which might leave options here to pass from that midfielder. And what you get with Lille here is this sort of, I suppose it's a kind of 3-1, sort of 4-2 shape. This allows them to progress the ball quite nicely. They are looking to attack out wide, and we'll come back to how they do the wide attack in a second, but you can see how it's sort of nicely spaced. There's plenty of passing options. There's a good degree of solidity here at the back as well, because this midfielder has dropped off. That allows Lille to rotate, circulate possession amongst themselves before they look to move forwards. Obviously, if the opposition are kind of suckered into this and maybe start trying to press, that's going to leave a nice big gap here that players can move into. And again, we'll talk a little bit about movement in a second. The other way that Lille will build up from the back is, instead of having this central midfielder dropping, he'll kind of maintain a position here. This guy might be a little bit more aggressive, pushing up. And instead, Font will stay relatively central, and the right back will drop back, and that will make the 3 here. That obviously allows for a little bit more positional fluidity here. It leaves a bit of space so that if Lille are able to progress the ball forwards into this area, then he's got room perhaps to run up into, take a kind of return pass up here. Again, you'll find the wingers drifting into the half spaces. It means there's 2 players in central midfield as well, so you lose a little bit of the width on the right-hand side, but you have a greater degree of passing options in the centre. So Lille will kind of mix this up depending on what the opposition are doing, and it's not, generally speaking, a plan that will change match to match. it will change situationally within games. Lille make a lot of use of movement in their attack. There are two particular types of this that are interesting. You get rotations in the wide areas here, which we'll look at, and then also a lot of horizontal and vertical movement in between the lines, particularly among the attacking four. So we'll look at that as well. These rotations out wide, effectively, it sort of echoes some of the tenets of positional play. So positional play, Tifo's done a video on this, you can go and check that out if you don't know what I'm talking about, says that you should have no more than a certain number of players on each vertical and horizontal line. And this is why you see players swapping in and out. So the right back here, Celik, and the right winger here, Akone, will basically move in and out depending on where one another's position is. The reason this is helpful is because it allows Lille to play third man balls quite a lot. So if Akone's out wide, Celik can drift in. If there's a pass on, say for example, quite a long pass up here, because the fullback has tucked inside, because the wide player's wide, rather than trying to take a long way around on an overlap, that means immediately there's a pass back in here. That opens up the whole of the other side of the pitch. Crucially as well, the opposition are going to start drifting over this way because Lille have clearly got a cluster of players. That often will allow them to then open up the far side of the pitch, the kind of the underexploited space. That could even be the left back getting as high as that. Lille are very keen to get as many players in the attacking zone as possible, ideally 3 or 4 at any given time. And these rotations are a really, really helpful way of allowing them to do that. Sometimes these rotations are in the more kind of traditional sense of the overlapping fullback that we'd expect. So the wide attacker will drift into the half space here. Let's assume that he takes a relatively progressive pass here from central midfield. He can either take the ball here, the right back, or if he's able to attack more quickly, he can get himself into the space for a pass here. Potentially, if this guy's defending quite narrowly, then he's going to be able to get right round on the overlap for a sort of, for a kind of pull back cross into the area. Lille are not the kind of side who tend to cross particularly from deep or particularly high. They much more try to get the ball in behind, cut it back along, and that's because of the second type of movement that we're going to look at now, which is more vertical and horizontal movement. So we've seen how Lille use movement and rotations out wide to try and create sort of passing triangles and so on that allow them to push players beyond lines of defence. You also see an awful lot of movement that is vertical and horizontal in this sort of attacking zone here. So while Lille are ostensibly a 4-4-2, sometimes, for example, David here will drop off significantly. That'll make them look a little bit more like a 4-2-3-1. They've also got Youssef Yassiki, who's weighed in with, I think, 7 goals this season, so he can swap in for David. He's kind of more of a shadow striker, a second striker as well. So this allows Lille to kind of slightly tweak their lineup every so often, depending on teams. It is worth noting, though, that they've only used 21 players this season, which is the fewest in Liga. So they are very, very consistent in their selection. This movement here is both horizontal and vertical. So both strikers will drop off significantly and also swap sides, depending on where the attack's coming from. That makes them unpredictable, it makes them difficult to mark. As we've seen, the wide attacking forwards will quite often tuck inside and occupy the half spaces, but they may stay wide. One of the things that they're frequently looking to do is make these sort of blindside runs. So let's get a bit of curve on it there. So they're trying to loop around the back of the opposition. Again, this guy might, maybe if the fullback here has been beaten, that central defender's coming across, he's going to try and get round the back of them because that makes obviously harder to defend the runs. Because of this movement, because these guys are moving in and out here like this, and the strikers are moving up and down like that, what it quite often does is you'll see Lille quite kind of stretched out in attack as the ball is progressed forwards. And then as the ball reaches, let's bring it all the way up here, reaches the attacking third, then they're clustering much more around this kind of central area. And that makes it very, very difficult to defend. The reason for this is that, for a start, they can get a lot of players forward into positions between the lines, but also these are all very, very technically adept players. So it's quite difficult to show on this, but if you can imagine the combinations between these players, you know, little flicks, interchanges, back heels, quick 1-2s and so on. Everything is geared towards playing at pace, playing in tight spaces, and putting players through to attack. It is also worth noting that they can score from distance a lot, particularly Ilmaz. His second goal against Lens at the weekend is worth checking out. And it comes from exactly the kind of pressing, actually, that we described in the earlier part of this video. And he basically is able to hit it from pretty much about here, and it curves round into the top corner. Fantastic goal. So they do pose that sort of threat. It's also worth noting that Lille are they're very quick to push forwards and try and hoover up rebounds. So they actually are joint in the league at the moment for goals that are created out of somebody else shooting and that being saved, or hitting the post or something, getting a rebound. So they're always alive to the opportunity. That's partly, again, because they have so much pace in this attacking line. It's partly because of the runs that they make through the blind side. It makes it harder for them to be defended against. But there's also just kind of an awareness and a hunger there to get in on the box, to try and make the most of these opportunities. And particularly if they shoot from long, there's always somebody following in. And they've scored some crucial goals that way. This is one of the reasons as well that they have so drastically exceeded their expected goals, because quite a lot of their shots are coming from long, from free kicks, from this sort of area of the pitch. It does mean that, yes, although they've got strikers who are, you know, kind of clinical finishers and are maybe making more of chances that are presented to them, they're generating a lot of shots from this kind of area and then trying to follow them in. So that's a sort of tactical explanation. Sometimes with expected goals, you can see a massive exceeding of an expected goals total and think that that's just a striker who's on a hot run. But there are sometimes tactical reasons for it as well, and I think this is one of those instances. So to recap in terms of how they attack, lots and lots of rotations in the wide areas with players overlapping and underlapping. That creates a lot of movement, makes it difficult to defend against. Similarly, strikers dropping off into the spaces between the lines, but not necessarily one of them. It might be both, it might be neither. Wide players tucking inside again, everything geared towards creating a cluster of players here together who can then create little interplays between each other and burst through. Also, again, it's worth noting that this, having so many players in proximity to the ball, sets Lille up really, really well for the opportunity to counter press. So if a tackle's made, you know, this defender is certainly going to find himself surrounded by lots of players. So a decade after their last league triumph, Lille are on the verge of it again. If they win their 2 remaining games, or if PSG slip up at all, it's pretty much guaranteed. Now, that team of a decade ago under Rudi Garcia had a number of players, people like Eden Hazard, Gervinho, Johan Cabaye, who excelled for that side, but then it was kind of stripped of its talent, and players were bought by bigger clubs. And that's sadly what's quite likely to happen with a number of these players. You know, they are talented, young, exciting. Actually, that's probably all of them that are going to get bought. Because of Ligue 1's situation financially, Media Pro, all of this kind of stuff, and it's complicated by Lille's own ownership problems, which you can look up and find out about. But it's likely that this team is going to be disassembled. So we can enjoy it now, and hopefully they will see it through to the end of the season and take the title. but these players will probably crop up from the beginning of next season at some of Europe's top teams. But for now, that's Lille.